Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining IBM today for a conversation around inclusive distancing in the new abnormal. I hope your first day of the Out and Equal Workplace Summit has been absolutely amazing, and I really appreciate you choosing to spend some time with us here today. The global crisis that each of us has experienced and continue to experience has really accelerated the pace of change in the ways we're working, and it's certainly going to impact the way we work forever. At first, the concepts of inclusion and social distancing might seem contradictory. On the one hand, we have a very real health need for us to keep physical distance from one another, yet psychologically, we need to be and feel connected more than ever. And I know that companies all over the world, many of you on this webinar today, have been challenged to find ways to build community and connection while ensuring your employees' health and safety. Today's conversation will focus on how we can foster inclusion for a remote workforce, as well as how to continue to embed inclusion and belonging without a physical office and face-to-face interaction. We're going to discuss why we need to demonstrate inclusiveness, especially in the current climate, what specific actions we can take to make others feel they are valuable members of our organization, and how inclusiveness empowers us to recover, recharge, and reimagine. So let's get started. I have the pleasure of moderating today's conversation with two absolutely amazing individuals. The first, Joy DeTore, pronouns she, her, Global Diversity and Inclusion Leader for IBM, joining us from, I'm going to guess, sunny Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And Ella Slade, pronouns they, them, IBM's global LGBT plus leader based in London, England. And I'm not going to begin to guess the weather.
Not good.
And I am Kimberly Messer, pronouns she, her, global diversity business development leader based in sunny today, Toronto, Ontario. I would also encourage you to please add your comments or questions into the Zoom chat if possible. And we will do our best to address some of those questions during our session, and if not, certainly at the end of our conversation today. All right, so let's get started. All right, now Joy. In the early days of the pandemic, there was certainly a lot of uncertainty in the world. And I felt as an IBMer, as an IBM employee, that IBM really set a great tone for its employees early with the work from home pledge. I understand this started as a grassroots initiative, and it really evolved into a company-wide pledge with a very simple goal of making work and life a little easier while we were working at home. Joy, if you could just tell the audience a bit about the pledge and why it was important for IBM to do this.
Yeah, Kim, thank you so much. And I loved in your opening comments because I think it was a perfect bridge into the conversation where we talked about how important it was to be physically distant, but socially connected. And that is really the context of what drove this whole idea. So at IBM, we have something called executive councils. Those executive councils are exactly like it sounds. We have a number of IBM executives who support our diverse initiatives. And the Women's Council actually was the group of IBMers who came together. And this was all about respecting new boundaries and navigating kind of this new way of working and living. And so it was really a small group of leaders who came together and looking at their teams and even their own situations, realized as a caregiver, my experience as an IBMer is very different than it was pre-COVID. And as a result, they started brainstorming, well, what is it about my home and work experience that feels very different? And I'll give you a really good example. This one came from India. In India, we had an IBMer tell us that in India, they all work in the office and they commute oftentimes more than an hour to get to the IBM location. Well, as you can imagine, in a very short period of time, we sent every IBM India employee home as a result of COVID. Now, here they were, the experience that they shared with us is you have multiple families living together in one roof, so multiple generations. So you would have grandparents, parents, children, and in some cases, even the siblings that were coming together. And one of the things that they shared was as parents and caregivers, they realized they were really invading into a space that was really the domain of people who were at home during the day. And it wasn't typically the IBMer. So the IBMer would leave in the morning, they would come home in the evening, and what they were experiencing was now they were invading in a domain that belonged to parents and other caregivers and maybe siblings whose work a calendar was very different than their own. So they had to have kind of a family conversation about, well, what does it mean now that as an IBMer, I'm moving back home to work, so that commuting experience is not what it used to be. And so they talked about this respectful exchange they had to have with their family to say, this is where I'm going to work, and I know I also need to be respectful of the space that you are traditionally used to during the day, but I am now actually invading. It was stories and experiences like that where we realized every caregiver was different, every family was different, and we needed to create new respectful boundaries of what did working together actually look like now. And so that's how the pledge started. It really started as a brainstorming, ideation of how can we respectfully, with kindness and dignity and compassion and understanding, how could we make sure that we created something that was company-wide, that was global, that people could relate to, and oh, by the way, it had a real human element into the experience. If you look at everything about this pledge, it's not necessarily about, I'm going to be the most productive IBM employee during the times of COVID. It was really, how am I going to be a better caregiver and, oh, by the way, continue to thrive at work. So everything that you see here is not necessarily driven by the business. It's about how do we serve the human aspects of our employees, and those ultimately required a great degree of compassion. That's how it started.
Yeah, it's amazing. I know, just to speak really quickly about, I know for me personally, when I saw this, it was such a relief, you know, as a parent with 2 school-age children at home, when the pandemic started, and also a wife who needs confidentiality to do her work, and with 1 office space, all crowded around a dining room table. It was incredibly challenging. So I know that this work from home pledge really resonated in our household for sure. And definitely I appreciated it as an employee. It was great.
I'll tell you, Kim, the other thing that we realized was not all caregivers' responsibility in the home is the same. And if there was anything that we realized very quickly was that if you were fortunate to be in a caregiving situation where you had assistance, whether that assistance was a spouse or a significant, or that assistance was maybe your in-laws lived with you, or maybe a sibling, we realized that the burden of responsibility for caregiving seemed to fall unfairly more on one caregiver than the other. And as a result of those responsibilities, it was another reason for us to intentionally look at our workplace and say, how are our caregivers feeling now? When we think about it, kind of the work from home experience at IBM probably started back in March, and we all went home. And the reality is, then here we are, how many months later, where we're evaluating how are we all doing in our caregiving situations. And because of those imbalances of caregiving, we are more worried about some of those caregivers who are IBMers, who are feeling the stress and the pressure of having more caregiving responsibility than maybe another person in the house. Those are the IBM caregivers that we are most concerned about. So refreshing, revitalizing, and always talking about this IBM home, work from home pledge is an important part of kind of our daily routine.
That's great. And I saw there was a question in the chat, you know, can other organizations borrow this pledge? I will tell you, if you Google IBM work from home pledge, you will find it. Our CEO, chairman, did post this on LinkedIn, so you can read a little more about it. But absolutely, if there are aspects of this that you can implement in your own workspace, please do so. That's why we're here, sharing best practices and doing what we can to help other organizations be successful. So let's pivot for a minute. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
What a great Yeah, I was just going to say, what a great comment. I want everyone to understand, we didn't trademark this. I mean, there was nothing unique or special. I'd be willing to bet if you brainstormed the 15 minutes with your teams, you would come up with items that also drove new thoughts. So my feeling would be, if you take this pledge and you share it with your teams and you come back and you find something important and substantive and meaningful we didn't think of, share it with us. We'd love to know. I'm sure that there are other companies even more creative that have experiences that you could add. So absolutely, this is not trademark. This doesn't belong to IBM. There's no trade secrets here. Feel free to use it, incorporate it in your companies. And most importantly, we hope at the end of the day, it makes a difference.
I think one of the things, just to kind of piggyback on the back of that, Joy, I think one of the things I love most about it is that it is so easy to interpret in your own way as well. Like, it's not very prescriptive. Like my favorite one is always the I pledge to support not camera ready times, because like we all have that like all the time. You know, everyone has one of those days where you're like, you know what, I've just had enough today, because it is draining. And I think those of us, I mean, I obviously I'm based in the UK and I'm in a global role, so I do spend a lot of my time on WebEx anyway, and on Zoom and all that kind of stuff. But even so, I think everybody's experienced so many more video calls, and it's so much more draining than face-to-face. I don't know why, but it just is. And sometimes you just need to not have the camera on and you're still engaged and whatever, but you know, sometimes you just need that break. And I think to have that as a thing where you don't have to feel guilty about it, and you can just say, I don't want my camera on right now, or not even address it, I think just sets a really great tone, and it's just really, it just makes everyone feel much more relaxed. So yeah, I agree. I think if others kind of have a look into this, I'm sure they'll find more things to add and stuff as well. But yeah, the not camera ready is my favorite.
Great. I know there are a few other questions in the chat. Feel free to ping me after the session. I'll also do my best to follow up with folks who've got questions. I do want to move on. We can always revisit this at the end of the session if there's time. I want to just pivot for a moment. So we've touched on the human element with the work from home pledge, and now I want to have a conversation about technology, because obviously this is really critical when we think about virtual environments. I know many organizations, I mean, just about every organization had to pivot very quickly to get infrastructure in place to support remote working on a scale that probably most were not prepared for, to be honest. IBM being a large technology company, I think we were very well positioned. I think the other thing that really helped us out was the fact that we've had flexible work options for many years. And so we were able to make that shift, I'll say somewhat seamless, for about 95% of our workforce within a week. And when I say seamless, I'm simply referring to the technological aspects of it. Certainly we just touched on with the work from home pledge, it wasn't seamless for most of us in our personal lives. But if we just look at it from a technology perspective. So Ella, I'd love you as the global leader of the LGBT plus constituency at IBM to maybe just share with the audience how you've leveraged some of these tools to create connection and community with our LGBT teams around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Kim mentioned, so I'm basically the only one that's kind of solely employed to like focus on LGBT plus things internally at IBM. Everyone else I work with are volunteers. So I rely heavily on these wonderful, wonderful people giving up some of their very precious time to work with me on really exciting and really important initiatives. So what we want to do is we want to make it as easy as possible for them to get involved, and as easy as possible for them to make impact and to really drive change. So, and that's where a lot of these tools kind of come in. I mean, these are tools that we've used for quite some time. So Box is our kind of file sharing platform that we use. It's incredibly useful. Mural is awesome. For those that haven't checked out Mural, it takes a bit of getting used to, but it's awesome for those like design thinking sessions, or just brainstorming sessions, or some form of creative collaboration, where normally if you were all face to face in a room, someone will be writing something on a whiteboard, someone will be sticking up sticky notes. It's the virtual version of that, and I find it really great as well. Just speaking from kind of experience over the last kind of year or so of being in my role, is I find it great when you've got a large group of people that you're trying to get ideas out of, and maybe, you know, when you're on one of those WebEx calls or Zoom calls or whatever, and it's all a bit quiet and no one really wants to speak up and volunteer their idea, everyone suddenly gets a bit shy and it's a bit awkward. Mural completely takes that away, because you're on there and everybody's contributing at the same time. No one is put on the spot, and I think that's really fantastic. So we definitely used Mural this year heavily in our Pride planning. obviously everything went virtual anyway with how we did Pride, and I'll kind of go into a bit detail on that in a bit. But yeah, Mural was incredibly useful for us to gather feedback from the community. Everyone could throw their sticky notes down around what worked well last year, what do they want to see this year. And then the other ones, I saw someone posted in the chat saying how powerful Slack is and how great it is. I love Slack, and yeah, it's just been amazing for the community, as has WebEx, as has all these other tools. I think like Joy said, and Kim said, we were very set up already because we're using these tools already, and that was a huge benefit. However, I think those people that were maybe slightly hesitant around some of the tools definitely got a bit of a kickstart into using them for sure. But we were very fortunate to already be so well set up to communicate so virtually kind of across the world.
Now, Ella, did you touch on, maybe you're going to touch on this later, the Slack?
Yeah, do you want me to go into that in more detail now?
Okay. Well, you can do it later. I just want to make sure you touched on it. We do it later. No problem. Sorry.
I'll do it later. It's fine. I'll go into more detail on Slack later.
I'm sorry for advancing the slides. Apparently, it's my first time using PowerPoint. Not, but anyway. All right. So I want to talk I'd like you to talk actually for a few minutes about business resource groups. For IBM and certainly for many organizations, BRGs are critical. They're really the foundational elements of executing our diversity and inclusion strategies around the globe. At IBM, we have over 250 BRGs. And Ella, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's over 40 LGBT. 52. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yes.
52 LGBT BRGs around the globe, which is just absolutely incredible. And I know they've stepped up in some really major ways during the pandemic. So we want to touch on that. And also I want to talk about resiliency because I know they're connected. You know, I don't know about most of you on this webinar, but on an average day, I don't often stop to think too much about how resilient I am. But we also know that it's really important, and resiliency is important in helping us meet new challenges, bounce back from difficulties. And this is really, you know, what's really great about it is it's something that it's a skill that you can increase your capacity for and your capabilities in. And so IBM's recognized that. So Joy, I would love you to talk for a minute about the work of our BRGs in terms of our Kindred Cafes and also around building resiliency, because I know the two have kind of gone hand in hand.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Kim. So if there's anything that we learned, right, as a result of what's happening to us in 2019, boy, could we go back? No, in 2020. Let's talk a little bit about workforce trends and kind of social movements. What's happening is workforce trends and those social movements, they're demanding a more holistic approach to diversity and inclusion. So let's think about where we find ourselves. We find ourselves in a world facing challenges like #MeToo, Press for Progress, Black Lives Matter, Time's Up, no ban, no wall, won't be erased, and say her name. So as we think about just what happened in 2020, so you've got COVID-19, xenophobia, an economic crisis, immigration reform, a racial pandemic, public protests. The need for healing and community has never been more important. And so the way the BRG Kindred Cafe actually evolved was because as a group of business resource group leaders, we looked at each other and we said, gosh, there's this unprecedented need for compassion, kindness, justice, dignity, unity. And we decided to introduce a new 4-letter word into the business, and that was, dare I say, love. And all of this is what started the BRG Kindred Cafe. And what we realized was that if we were talking amongst ourselves, sharing, collaborating, and supporting each other on so many different dimensions, not just how are we being productive at work, but how were our families learning how to operate under these new experiences. And what we realized is we cannot be alone. There must be other people around the globe who maybe they need an outlet. And literally that's how the BRG Kindred Cafe started. We literally just tested it. We threw it out there. We had no agenda. We had nothing in mind. When Ellis said the use of Mural has been really productive for IBM, that was the only thing that we had. And it was literally a blank mural board. That was it. We invited people to join us, and we literally had just a few open-ended questions and a mural board. That was it. And literally we started the BRG Kindred Cafe by saying, how are you doing? That was our first question. And literally people went intramural, they grabbed stickies, and we started seeing patterns of experiences people were having around the globe. So one question led to another. We literally were looking at the Post-it notes in mural, and we would just ask other thought-provoking questions like, oh, how are you staying healthy? How are you eating well? How are you juggling, work and life? What are you doing as a caregiver? Literally in that session, we asked questions. Because the response was so overwhelming, not only because of the participation that happened during the mural session, we ended the session by saying, this was really an informal opportunity for people to come together. It wasn't mandatory, it was completely optional, and people didn't have to come back if they didn't want to. But we asked the question at the end of the session, if we did this again, would you come back? Unanimously, 119 people said yes. And so we thought, why not? Let's do it again. So we threw it out there again, empty mural board, but what we did was we took their thoughts from before, we categorized it as good design thinking session facilitators would do. And as people came back, we said, the last time you were in this session, this is what we realized you were saying, thinking, and feeling. Has anything changed? We probably did our first BRG Kindred Cafes, and I would say at least 5, as ourselves, with no formal agenda. None of us are trained psychologists. None of us are wellness, well-being coaches or professionals. It literally was an informal opportunity for people to get away from their experience. And what was most shocking when we first started this, we did this at 8 o'clock in the morning, East Coast time. And you would think most people that were going to participate were not in the United States. The exact opposite was true. We had more people from India, China, Japan, and the Philippines join than people in the United States. At that moment, we realized that there was a need outside of the United States. People were starving for an opportunity to share and collaborate. So then we got smart and we said, maybe we should invite some trained professionals to do this and host a conversation with wellness experts to maybe help people in a variety of aspects of their life. That's where we decided on this Being Resilient at IBM. Be Resilient at IBM is a learning bundle that has these 4 components: reflect, relate, renew, and I think it's revitalize. And so what we did was we had subject matter experts. Some of them were learning consultants. Some of them were wellness coaches. Some of them had their backgrounds or PhDs in exercise management. Some of them were nutritional health specialists. And this is where we got really smart. At the end of our sessions, we said, what would you like to learn about next? And then based on what people were, how they were responding, that would determine which one of those squares under our Be Resilient bundle did we need to focus on. So things like healthy snacking came up, something about easy to cook meals. Another one was just wrapped around movement. How do I, if I'm sitting at my desk all day, how do I make sure that I am getting up, taking care of myself, and not experiencing video fatigue? So we did sessions on movement, and we literally made people in WebEx get up and move. And it was amazing. Everybody participated. You might think of that experience and say, oh boy, Joy, how could that be successful? I'd be willing to bet half of your people didn't stand up and stretch. That's not true. All 100% of everybody who was on the call participated, and some of them had their videos on, some did not, and there was a lot of chatter in the chat space. Another thing that we actually did with the Be Resilient bundle was, how are you taking care of yourself, and what is your self-talk? We did not know that self-talk was going to be one of the most popular, powerful sessions that we hosted, because what we realized what people were saying to themselves was more important than what other people were saying to them. And so this is why we started to bring in health and wellness speakers, so that if something came up where somebody looked like they were in distress or they were sharing something that I didn't have the capacity to handle, at least we had a mental health professional who could reach out separately and say, how are you doing? The other sessions that we did were wrapped around like simple things like hydrating and meditation. So the great thing about the BRG Kindred Cafe is it started serendipitously, very casually, very informally, a blank mural board, and absolutely no agenda. And then finally, we realized it was important to structure our conversations and bring in some mental health experts. One thing that we've decided with the BRG Kindred Cafe, it was much bigger than the BRGs. So people started to participate who were not even members of BRGs, right? They looked at the title and they're like, what's a BRG? Right? So it turned into a teachable moment for us, because we could teach those IBMers who didn't know about this community of people who come together. We could teach them about joining. We could teach them about community. We could talk about engagement. So this BRG Kindred Cafe grew and expanded well beyond our expectations, and has become so popular that the BRG Kindred Cafe, which was only supposed to be a couple of sessions, let's check in, how's everybody doing, has now turned into a full year initiative that will continue through 2020.
So amazing. So amazing. We've watched that just blossom and take off, you know,
Amazing.
as you said. Oh, so good. All right. Pride Month, Ella.
This is a lot.
Oh, it's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot.
Let's talk about, well, just a quick intro for everybody on the phone. Just for your reference, in case you're not aware. So Pride Month at IBM is the month of June. It's celebrated globally. So it's not just a US campaign. And for someone in a role like Ella's, this is a pretty heavy lift. It's a big job. And not only were we dealing with COVID, we also had other factors that meant there was a lot of pivoting that was happening leading up to Pride Month. So we want to talk a little bit about the pivoting that was done with the programming, the messaging to make space for dialogue and action on racial justice, racial injustice, and and also the pivot, of course, that was made to the virtual celebration that happened around the globe. So I'd love you to talk a little bit about maybe some of the early challenges that you had, because I'm sure many folks on the call had similar experiences in their organizations. And then also ultimately talk about the success, because I think we, those of us who were participating in it could all agree that a virtual Pride gave us all maybe a unique experience, one that we wouldn't have had if we were in our sort of typical silos celebrating in our cities around the globe. So thank you, Ella, for everything you did for Pride Month. And I know the audience would love to hear about that experience.
Absolutely. So I've been, for kind of further wider kind of context around me, so I've been in my role, I joined in June 2019. So I joined just at the beginning of Pride Month, the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, all that stuff that the team had already been working on. I just kind of joined right in at the tail end, didn't really have to do that much for that year's Pride Month. So this was my first Pride Month. And in January, I was like, really excited. I've got to start thinking about Pride Month. I'm going to start thinking about it in February. And in February, I started hearing about this coronavirus thing. And I was like, oh, that doesn't sound great. And then as soon as I started kind of actually properly planning, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is huge. This is going to have a huge impact on our experience, on our IBM's experience, on the LGBT plus community's experience as a whole, on how we celebrate our progress and celebrate ourselves and pride in the LGBT plus community. So straight away, like I mentioned earlier, we used Mural to really plan what we wanted to do, and we ended up making the decision that everything was going to be virtual. Like one by one, each week on my planning call, another person would be like, oh, our Pride's now been cancelled as well. Our March has been cancelled as well. Ours been cancelled as well. So eventually we were like, right, let's shift. Let's put all of our focus into making this an amazing virtual experience. Because, I mean, I don't know about all of you on the call, but I definitely felt, and I know a lot of my friends and a lot of my kind of work colleagues as well, definitely felt with kind of everything closing down and going into lockdown or whatever, a real like missing, like queer community and queer culture and all that kind of stuff we were just completely missing out on, because obviously, you know, bars are closed, cinemas are closed, cafes are closed, all that kind of stuff, where, you know, you get to meet other LGBT plus people. So those kind of safe spaces suddenly went very quickly. So we were really keen to make sure that Pride for us this year was all about community and was all about us coming together from around the world to celebrate one another. So that's the direction we were taking, and we were heading straight along that track. And then obviously at the end of May, there was the murder of George Floyd, and the whole Black Lives Matter movement came straight to the forefront, and quite rightly so. I remember very clearly logging on Monday the 1st of June, and I had an email pre-written that I was ready to send out to welcome everybody. It's Pride Month, isn't this exciting? It's COVID, it's a bit different. But I logged on and was very much like, I can't send that email. This is not right. This is not the right tone. This is not the right direction for us to be taking. This isn't a time for celebration and for rainbows and sparkle and glitter and all that kind of great stuff that we all love. You know, this is a time for us to take a step back and a time for us to make space and to give that space to the Black community. And so we shifted focus very quickly, and worked with, I started to run some focus groups with Black members of the LGBT plus community to really find out from them, what do you guys want? You know, what do you want from your experience for the rest of Pride Month? If you say that you want us to completely drop everything we do to do with Pride and to completely be focusing on the Black community, let's do that. The feedback was actually not that. It was, let's do a combination of the two. So my initial kind of email out to everybody, kind of before I even ran these focus groups, was that now is a time for us to sit back, to listen, to be allies, and to really, not necessarily sit back, that's not the right phrase, but to listen and to then step up and be allies. I think that was really the main thing. So, and it was really just about the LGBT plus community giving up, you know, it's just giving up their real estate, their space on kind of our website, our logo. Always in Pride Month, our logo on all of our accounts turns into our rainbow logo. This year it turned to the Pan-African logo for the entire month of June. And honestly, I couldn't be prouder that we were able to give that space, and we were able to say, actually, no, we don't want it to be the rainbow logo. This is not the right time. So it was a phenomenal experience. It really was. And I think I was just so proud of the LGBT plus community, just because I think it was, you know, it was myself, it was my team working with Joy and other members of the team, and also this focus group that I'd been working with that kind of decided the decision of the direction we were going to go in. But I was so pleased to see the reaction of the LGBT plus community just throwing themselves 100% behind this. And, you know, we did the work from home pledge, we did this embrace pledge, which is around racial injustice. Seeing so many members of the LGBT plus community getting behind that, it was just fantastic. We pivoted one of our biggest events, which was a kind of fireside chat with it was going to just be our LGBT plus, some members of our LGBT plus executive council, so some of our out execs. It was going to be them just talking about community, about COVID, all this kind of stuff. We then changed it, and it was actually then a collaborative approach between our LGBT plus executive council and the Black executive council coming together to really talk about the kind of history, about solidarity, about moving forward together. You know, the parallel was drawn quite a bit between, you know, where we've come from an LGBT plus community perspective, the history, Stonewall, you know, the fact that was started by, you know, a Black trans woman and other trans people and people of color. Like, those stories, I think, felt even more prominent this year, I'd say, than they did last year for the 50th anniversary, because they were so raw this year and they really came back to the forefront. So it was a phenomenal month for us. It was such an emotional month for so many of us as well, obviously. But I think touching on the whole kind of COVID thing and what worked for us with the COVID stuff. So obviously everything was virtual, and when we were planning, we were like, oh, it's not ideal, but you know, it's what we've got to do, etc. It was amazing. So obviously, like we mentioned, you know, we've got 52 BRGs, business resource groups around the world. Some are more active than others, I'll say that. Some are super duper active, some are less active, some pop up for Pride Month and then go into hibernation a bit again. You know, it all really varies. But there are so many IBMers at locations where they don't have a business resource group, or maybe they're in a country that is a bit more isn't as forward thinking when it comes to LGBT plus rights. Maybe culturally it's less acceptable to be LGBT plus. this year was really, it was their year. You know, it was the year for people in those countries or in those locations that weren't involved in BRGs to get involved. I remember speaking on a call I think the call was in Hungary, and we had people on the call from the Philippines and also from Mexico, all on the same call, and then someone from Finland as well. So even though it was a call that was run by the BRG in Hungary, because it was all virtual and all our events were hosted in the same place online and promoted in the same place, it just made it so much more accessible for people around the world to join events. And what I loved seeing was like friendships forming like across the world throughout these calls, and people just getting to know each other, and they've not worked with each other before, but you know, they'll collaborate on a project for Pride Month, and now they've kind of got ongoing friendships as a result. So I mean, I won't go through the numbers, they kind of speak for themselves, but I was absolutely thrilled with the way that the community got behind our shift to support Black Lives Matter, the way that the community adapted to COVID and everything. And then also towards the end of the month, we did a really kind of meaningful thing where we put together it was kind of like a one-pager remembering those members of the LGBT plus community that we've lost over the kind of recent months or so. Obviously there were a lot of trans people who were murdered in June in Pride Month and just before that as well. And we really used that opportunity to reflect and to just say their names, remember them, and to just kind of remember why this is so important, why Pride Month is so important. So it was definitely a memorable Pride Month for sure, and my first one in this role, but I absolutely loved it. It was a phenomenal experience, so I was really pleased to be a part of it for sure.
Well, it was an incredibly memorable month on so many levels, and you've highlighted a lot of those for the audience today, so thank you again for that. There was a question, the LGBT plus financial wellness seminar, was that a US focused conversation?
Yes, it was. So it was open to anyone to join, because some of the context, some of the stuff that was discussed was relevant to other people around the world. However, obviously a lot of the local things are different, you know. So it was primarily focused on the US, but there were themes that were accessible elsewhere. So for example, I joined and I'm in the UK. My taxes and whatever are very different to how it's done in the US. But I still learned a lot from that session and still found it incredibly useful as well. So no, it was a really great session. Okay. And one of the other things that was really great in the session, or throughout the kind of year, month, felt like a year, was just the teams that really stepped up, and some of our business resource groups that really stepped up and just did amazing stuff, like our team in India, the team in Mexico. Oh my gosh, I think I saw that Luis is actually on the call right now. Big shout out to him, he did an incredible job. Just so many of the teams really pulled it out the bag this year, and I don't know if that was because it was COVID and everyone was forced to do things slightly differently and therefore think about it more in advance, but wow, it was an amazing experience.
Great, thank you. Joy, you're going to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing about the financial wellness seminar. I think what made it very easy for us is IBM has a benefit, and again, this is a benefit in the United States, but we have a benefit in the United States where we have a partnership with Goldman Sachs, and they provide free financial advising support to US employees. So what we did was we leveraged that relationship that we have with Goldman Sachs, and we asked them for this LGBT plus financial wellness seminar. What's the catalyst behind when we first did this was marriage equality. What we realized was that our straight family and friends were years ahead of us as it related to things like, how do you share bank accounts? What do you do about jointly filing taxes? What do you do about estate planning? And some of those items where just the maturity of our conversations in our relationships just felt different. And so the financial wellness seminar was really geared around spending and saving and filing for taxes, and it was really beautiful. It was a great experience and has just continued to grow and evolve, but I think that's what made that experience easier for us at IBM, was we already had that infrastructure and that service already in place. So I don't want to misrepresent, oh, this was easy to do. It was easy to do because we already had an existing relationship with a financial advising company. So that's the one thing I wanted to mention. There was also a question, I cannot remember who asked it. It might have been Lisa, maybe not. I'm sorry, I can't scroll through and look at the questions. But somebody had asked, what do you do during the BRG Kindred Cafe around movement when you have differently abled people on the phone or on WebEx? Great question. We had talked about that previously because we knew that there were people on our phone or on our calls where the limitations were going to be different. And as a result, what we decided to do was really stick to stretching, meditation, suggestions, recommendations. We were very careful about saying, everybody stand up, right? It was, in your place, if you are able, right? And if you wanted to remain standing or remain sitting, you could perform these experiences. And so that was our approach for people with diverse abilities. We wanted to be really sensitive that if we had an experience where people were going to be physically active and some might feel as though they were excluded because of something that we were going to do, we were hypersensitive to making sure no one felt excluded.
Great, thank you, Joy. I know there's a few other questions in the chat, but what I'm going to do is I know we're going to have a little bit of time at the end, so I promise to come back. I just want to finish up the topics that we wanted to cover today. So I just want to touch on family. Now, I know IBM has done a lot to help families during this very difficult time, making sure we have the tools and the resources that we need to be, to feel supported and also to be resilient, like you talked about earlier. If you could share with the audience, Joy, some of the ways IBM is supporting families, all types of families, during this period of uncertainty.
Yeah, I would say, and I love that. I thank you for bringing up this slide because I think it really highlights it. It really goes back to how were we being sensitive to needs around families, and all of those families looked very different, and the experience around COVID-19 was important. So one of the things that we did was we launched this website called Family at IBM. What we realized was we have a lot of passionate people at IBM who also have written books or created learning resources. And so what we did was we used this Family at IBM location to put some of those resources out there because we knew that caregivers were struggling with homeschooling. We also knew that for the younger children who were at home, parents were absolutely struggling. It was cute to talk to the kids because they oftentimes would show up on camera and we would ask, hey, how are your parents doing with homeschooling, right? With their parents sitting right there, they're like, my parents are horrible, right? My parents aren't really good teachers. So I think maybe now we should all have a greater sensitivity and celebrate our educators because they're amazing. But we wanted to make sure that there were special resources out there for toddlers because caregivers were struggling with making sure that we were still stimulating their minds and their thoughts and their bodies, but parents just didn't feel equipped with resources on how to do that. One experience that I really enjoyed that we did was called IBM Radio, and IBM Radio really is a thing. There really is a frequency at IBM. It's in Austin. It's called IBM Radio. And so what radio stations were actually doing, frequencies were doing, people were coming on and reading stories. It was so awesome. You had different story times that were happening. And now as we're going into celebration months, Hispanic Heritage Month and Native American Heritage Month, we actually have people saying, I want to use the IBM frequency because I want to read a story dedicated to lives around the Hispanic community or around the Native community. And it's just been beautiful how people are using those new resources. Ella talked earlier about design thinking. How many new tools we've had to learn and leverage to just stay connected with one another. And then, of course, we have expanded benefits for parents and caregivers who are finding themselves needing that additional time off. So whatever our time off policy was in a particular country, and it does vary based on country laws, we literally were expanding those benefits because of COVID, because of homeschooling, because of caregiving experiences. And I say caregiving because not only were children affected by this pandemic or parents who had school-age children or college-age children, for those of you who are sandwiched with elder adults, remember there was a time, 6 months, where people might have had a family member who was in an assisted living facility where you couldn't see your loved one. And so how were we providing caregiving support for those IBMers who were struggling because of the separation of not being able to see their family members? I say this not only because I had the experience of losing both of my parents in hospice, and I cannot even imagine what that experience would have been like to not be there with them at their side for that final journey. My spouse's mother was in a facility where they were not letting people in, and how she went 6 months only able to see her mom through a window or through a video chat. And her mother, by the way, was in hospice. So imagine the fear and the anxiety of being told your parent is actively dying, but given the current conditions, you can't see them and you're not permitted in. That was just unconscionable to me, and to the experience that I was watching happen to my spouse. And so there was true sensitivity that when we were talking about these family care experiences, it wasn't just parental care, it was caregivers across the spectrum. So we took all of those into consideration as we thought about how do we provide additional benefits to IBMers who were in very different experience situations.
Thank you, Joy. And don't be alarmed by this next slide. I flunked this in here without showing you. But just an extension of, I saw this today on the Family at IBM site, and just reiterate really quickly, just the extension of so many of the learning modules and education that we've provided for our employees have really been extended to our families. And I love that. And so I just saw this today, and I just wanted to add it in here for those that were attending the webinar. Obviously, you can explore this. Everyone will have a copy of the PDF. But just, again, just sort of, you know, we continue to build out our offerings around the Family at IBM through the Family at IBM lens, which I think is so amazing. All right. Ella, outside of Pride Month, you do all kinds of amazing things to help engage our global LGBT community. So I'd love you just to touch on each one of these quickly for our audience, because again, there's such a long list of things that you do with this community, but these are 3 things that we wanted to highlight.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's quite a few things that have kind of gone on obviously this year, and just to highlight a few of the things that we do. So about a year ago, I kickstarted these weekly community calls that I cannot take credit for the name at all. Someone in the community was like, you should name it LGBT with Ella because you're British, so you drink tea. And I was like, that's hilarious. I love a good pun, so I'm stealing that. So we have our weekly LGBT with Ella calls. So I run them on a Tuesday, 1 in the morning, my time, to kind of encourage kind of people from the kind of AP and India, Japan, and that kind of region, Europe, and Mia to join. And then I do one later in the day, my time, to kind of hit the North America and Latin America kind of regions. So basically what those calls are is little, hi, how are you? What's going on? I literally give an update about how my week's been, any kind of projects I'm working on or things people might be interested in. And then everyone just has a chat. What's on everyone's mind? What topic do you want to talk about today? And we'll just kind of have a bit of a discussion, a brainstorm. If there's anything that I'm working on that I just want to kind of sense check and find out a few members of the community what they think about this, I'll maybe bring it up on these calls. So it's just really very, very informal, just a bit of a chat and a chance to get to know people. And I had an IBMer who is no longer with IBM, he's retired, but he was joining these calls for quite a while, and I'd never met him before, and he's not involved in any of the projects, but he'd always join, and he wouldn't say much, he'd just listen a lot, and often would do thumbs up at the camera. And then he announced one time that he was retiring, and next week was going to be his last call, and he said that this had been one of his favourite things about his whole 20-something years at IBM were these calls. And I was just like, that's amazing. Like, it's so lovely to hear that, you know, this little community has made such a difference. So that's what the weekly community calls are. The other stuff, out executive office hours. So we have a number of out executives at IBM, and they have recently started holding these kind of open office hours. They're more formal than my kind of LGBT with Ella, but they're still pretty informal. So it's basically just kind of a casual opportunity to get to know an out exec. We did quite a bit of feedback when I was doing the mural stuff around pride planning and what people want to see. A lot of people said, we want more exposure to our execs. We want to get to know our out executives. So that's why we started launching these executive office hours where people would just drop in, get to know someone a bit better. I think because it's quite a casual thing, the numbers aren't huge, but that works perfectly because then it's so much more intimate and you can actually get to know each other a bit more rather than it just being attending a panel discussion or something like that, which is what we historically have done more of. The final one is the Embrace Speaker Series. So as I mentioned before around the fact that when everything was happening with the Black Lives Matter movement, or whenever everything kind of came to the forefront in June, obviously it's still going, but when everything came to the forefront in June, there was so much going on and so much was happening. And IBM in general felt very much like we need to be elevating the voices of Black IBMers, and we need to be sharing their stories and hearing what they have to say and hearing their experiences. So what we started doing was really showcasing some of the voices of the Black IBM community, finding out what they've experienced, what their experiences have been like. And there's been some other kind of more leadership type series as well that's also tackled some of these issues of racial injustice too. So it's been really, really powerful to hear some of these voices and hear some of these stories and to get to know these different IBMers and their experiences of going through the world as a Black person, and just some of the things and the injustices that they've faced. So it's been incredibly, incredibly powerful for everyone to hear.
Thank you, Ella. And I'm just going to remind everyone, if you do have a question that we've not addressed in the chat, please enter it. I think we're going to have about 5 minutes, maybe 6 minutes at the end to answer any remaining questions. Feel free to repeat your question if you posed something earlier and we missed it. I think Ella has responded to a few, as have I, but feel free to post your question in the chat now. So I think we can all agree that, leadership matters now probably more than ever, especially during challenging, uncertain times. Most of our employees, our workforces look for our leaders for empathy, support, and action. I know my personal experience has been that IBM has built some really powerful resources to support our managers, our BRG leaders, and our executives, that we can actually show up for our teams, show them that we care and can provide the support they need to stay resilient, focused, and engaged. Joy, I know you've been really closely involved with our learning teams in developing some of this education. How has IBM been addressing the need for education across, not just from a COVID perspective, but also difficult conversations, managing bias, et cetera?
Yeah, it's such a great point that you made about the importance of leadership. I think the thing is really making sure that our leaders felt qualified to have conversations with employees. And I say that word qualified tongue in cheek, because there were no qualifications to have these conversations. You didn't need an accreditation. You didn't need your PhD. You didn't need your MBA to pick up the phone and talk to your employee and say, how are you doing? However, we did feel as though there was a need to formalize some structure around it. So we created a lot of conversation guides that helped managers start the conversation, continue the conversation, meet with their teams, meet individually, address issues around bias. I know there's something here about committing yourself to racial equity. And we have a whole new series of courses that are going to come out wrapped underneath that Embrace umbrella that Ella showed earlier. And Embrace is actually going to extend beyond our Black community, and it's going to expand to all races and all ethnicities, simply because we know that there are voices across all communities that need to be heard and ways that we need to learn. So it's helping our managers at every level with a conversation guide about how do you bring this discussion into a team conversation? How do you make it feel more comfortable one-on-one? If you have an employee who's feeling distressed, how do you approach that situation without having to have a medical degree? What do you do if you do realize that there's an employee in distress? The whole idea around authenticity and honest conversations is really at the foundation of what we're trying to do here. Literally start talking to your employees on a regular basis, not only about work, because I think they're actually working a lot more than they ever did before because they're not commuting, they're staying at home, they're finding themselves in more work responsibilities. So having more personal and being very intentional about having personal conversations with your employees has been a really important part of the discussion.
Great. I see a few people are asking about some of these resources and how they can gain access to them. So I was just about to type in the chat, but I will just say that please feel free to reach out to me directly. You can find my contact info on the Pathable platform, or reach out on LinkedIn. I'm happy to arrange a conversation with you after Out and Equal to dig a little deeper into some of these guides. I wouldn't say that we're sharing them publicly far and wide, but if it's certainly just a one-on-one conversation where you want to understand a little bit more about how IBM is approaching some of these issues, I'm absolutely happy to meet with you to discuss that. So other questions? I'm just going to look at that. It's Q&A time. Can share more about managing bias. We're going to do that. There was a question that was asked earlier and it's been repeated by Kathleen. How does IBM balance be kind with regards to noise with employees who have sensory needs that make unexpected noise extremely stressful?
Yeah, I'm actually glad that was brought up because we had an experience during one of our mural sessions where this came up. And it wasn't necessarily wrapped around sensory needs. And I don't know if maybe we can get the person to elaborate on the sensory needs. Is that just people being off mute, or was it just people talking over each other, or maybe it was just the volume level? I want to make sure that I'm respectful to actually what that says. So maybe as Kathleen is elaborating on that, let me tell you an experience that we had in mural. When we were in mural, we realized, to Ella's point, it's pretty chaotic. I mean, for those of you who have never been in mural, think of it as an electronic bulletin board, and everybody is just participating in it all at once. Sometimes you accidentally type over top of somebody's needs. Sometimes you move somebody's sticky note. Sometimes you accidentally delete somebody's sticky note. I mean, it can feel a little bit like a free-for-all. So we did try to structure the mural into sections. However, what we realized was we had an employee who was in the session who actually sent me like a note publicly saying, Joy, I happen to be in the neurodiverse community, and participating in mural is impossible for me. I can't participate, and I'm starting to get frustrated. And my comment to her was, let's take this offline so I understand. So we had a separate conversation. I brought our D&I leader who supports our people with diverse abilities community. And we literally brainstormed with this person to understand what was it about mural. Even though we had it organized, even though we had it structured, even though we had sample already stickies that people didn't have to pull and didn't have to be different sizes, and didn't have to worry about different fonts, and didn't have to worry about different colors, we still missed something. And so what we realized was it wasn't something that we were doing, it was a functionality that was missing in mural. And so when we learned more about the experience, we called mural and we said, we have people in our community who learn different across the spectrum. And we learned that your tool is not necessarily friendly for individuals who identify in the neurodiverse community. How are you going to make this tool better? We never thought that conversation was going to go anywhere until they hired a developer who is redesigning the mural platform for IBM, taking people with neurodiverse conditions into consideration so the experience they would have in mural would be positive and productive. So we never thought hosting a BRG Kindred Cafe, doing a mural session, somebody sending me a private note, me picking up the phone and having a conversation, and then calling the vendor and saying, even if it was that one person, even just that one person who was not having a good experience, I was motivated to say, what are we going to do differently? And we called mural and got them on the phone, and they said, you're right. Can you bring more people onto the phone so that we can learn? We did that. and they hired a developer. They're going to be changing their platform. We're going to see some new experiences in Mural, and we're going to write a blog about it. And the reason we thought writing the blog was so important was because one strong, courageous voice mattered. And we took it seriously.
Joy, I told you I learned something every time that we talk, and I talk to you just about every day. So that was incredible. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Ella. Thank you, Joy. Thank you to all of you who chose to spend an hour of your very valuable day with us. I hope that you found it useful. I would encourage you to please take the survey that you'll see in Pathable. I'd also encourage you to please reach out to Joy, Ella, or myself if there's anything that we didn't talk about today, or you want to dig a little deeper into any of the topics that we shared. Thank you again. I hope that you have an absolutely wonderful